My guest today is Amanda Orson, who was among the first women to graduate from the Citadel and is currently the head of North America for Curve, a popular fintech startup from the UK. Curve focuses on simplifying the way people spend, see, and save by combining their entire wallet into a single card and app. Amanda is a phenomenal advocate for creating leadership opportunities, and her focus on sponsorship drove me to this discussion. When preparing for this episode, I must admit, this is the most excited I've ever been with discussing how to focus an episode on leadership. Amanda has a fire in her belly on both the way she approaches leadership and how she sees opportunities in the world. Join us today on our discussion on agility, leadership, and how not to take yourself too seriously. Thanks so much, Amanda, for being on the episode today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So one of my first questions I'd love to ask is, how did you get where you are now?
A very circuitous path is the short answer. The real answer is I stayed flexible and maintained a lot of optionality. And I didn't take the first thing, I took the best next step over and over again. So going backward, probably in 2005, 2006, I recognized that I didn't want to work at law firms, that I didn't want to become an attorney, and I knew how to code on a very rudimentary basis and really expanded upon that skill set. Ended up building out some sites, had to figure out how to monetize them. And this is going to be a very, very abbreviated TLDR. But eventually I started building income producing websites and built that into an agency business where I help small businesses. And then eventually built some fairly substantial sites, and through partnerships with other people and through my own asset creation, ended up basically being in what you would consider to be a small private equity arrangement of building and buying and selling these actual legitimate businesses.
And you've, me not coming from a business background, focused on national security and defense, I really latched on to some of the advice that I heard you gave at a recent event with the Citadel, and you really talked about the closer you get to the money, the more you get to keep. And I thought that is so critical to what we do in national security, because the closer you get to the decision maker, the more input you provide. Can you kind of walk down that line of thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. That was actually paradoxical advice that my father gave me a really long time ago. And I didn't understand. He comes from, an investment banking background. So that sort of made sense to me. But I didn't understand what it meant really until much later in my career, which is simply that money, currency, is a form of power. And the closer you are to whatever is pulling the strings or holds the power, the more power you yourself get to have. So if you infer that that power comes through compensation, then money is the object. But at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is to create and affect change, whether in my discipline, it comes down to building a product that people want to use for a mass audience, or, in your arena, building and affecting change that influences national security. Basically, the higher up you go and the closer you get to where the decisions are being made, the more of an impact you get to have.
That's totally true. And because you come from a military kind of mindset background, how do you see that path towards leadership positions in your industry, and how has that prepared you for the entrepreneurial field?
I think that one of the great assets that I had very early on is I would be ignorant not to say that I learned how to navigate a very political relationship very early, which has been an amazing asset to have that I didn't see at the time. But better than that, I learned the power of initiative. Somebody said at some point, the world is run by those who show up. Absolutely true. The number of people that will eliminate themselves from competition by just not showing up is most of them, over and over and over again, regardless of what discipline it is you're actually thinking about. But beyond that, initiative, saying, follow me, really takes you to some incredible places because people want to be led. This is not I don't know why this is not common knowledge or general understanding, but people want to be led. They're waiting for someone to step into that void and actually lead whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. So very early on, learning how to lead, how to not accept status quo and actually, take charge. And I would say being able to work within ambiguous environments has been really, really helpful. Startup worlds are chaos. We like to say assembling the plane while flying. It is very much you're going to eat what you kill on a regular basis. So you really need to go fast and be okay with chaos and sort of sort order from that to achieve whatever the objective is so that you have the ability to live to fight, another year or another round or until you reach profitability. So I would say that's in a nutshell. The political environment stuff definitely helped. Knowing to step up and lead and not to just accept that, not just accept the void, to actually show up. And then, of course, being able to work within ambiguous environments, massively helpful.
And Amanda, you've also spoken in the past about really knowing your people. I mean, we've talked about kind of hiring the people that are just grinders and then also those firecrackers in your organization. How do you discern between that? And how do you kind of encourage people to get to their best selves?
Absolutely. So I think within every organization, there are the people that are ambitious and want to lead people and the organization forward. And almost always that comes through people. And then there are people that want to do their jobs and do their jobs to the best of their possible ability, but they want to remain subject matter experts. It's very critical when you're in a position of authority to understand who that person is. Basically, you don't want to put the grinders, as I would call them, the people that want to be the subject matter experts, the people that want to get deeply into the weeds with some tool set or, some specific discipline of their work. You don't want to put them in a position to lead an organization, specifically people. It's like everybody's a genius, but if you tell a fish to climb a tree, it'll think it's stupid. It's exactly that. If you put people in some position where they're not fit for purpose or it's not what they're actually really engaged in, you're going to end up having a bad time. You're going to have a disenchanted leader, somebody that doesn't actually know or isn't fit for that purpose. And what's worse is that you're going to miss the opportunity to recognize people that actually want to lead organizations, that want to lead people, putting them in the position of being a subject matter expert. They're just going to be ground into the dust. They're going to churn. That's just not what they want to do. They're going to get bored super quickly.
Exactly. And you've spoken also about kind of that leadership, what it takes to be at the top of your game, in those top echelons, really in the C-suite. How difficult it is, very large or small. You compared it, I've heard you in the past, to almost being a MacGyver.
Yes. Again, going back to when you're in sort of an ambiguous or chaotic environment, you have to understand what your assets are at your disposal, and you've got to make it work. It's exactly MacGyver. If you think back to the 80s, was it a sitcom? I'm not sure, but yeah.
I'm sure some of our listeners that will ring a bell with some, and for some, it's gonna bypass them, but that's okay. Swiss Army. How about we go to Swiss Army knife? There we go. Most people know that.
Yeah. Essentially, what you're going to have to do is create the best solution or execute with the best of the tools at your disposal, right? I could wave a magic wand and have $1 billion in our corporate bank account and build a much larger team and probably accomplish a lot of things faster, but I don't have that. So I have to sort of, run what I've brung. I've got to use the tools at my disposal, the people, the technical assets, and make it happen with what I've got. That's what a MacGyver does. That's where MacGyvers excel. And you'll see them in almost any job or leadership position that's in a chaotic or ambiguous environment. You're going to have a MacGyver up front.
And that ties back to the point we just discussed earlier, really with that kind of relationship with power and how it may not always be the rank or the title or the place in the organization. Can you go back and loop around back to kind of how you see your thoughts and relationship with power?
Yeah, I think that power, rank or leadership, right? That distributes influence, but it does not create influence. And power is ultimately about that. It's about being influential and impactful in your organization. You do not have to have rank or, be a C-suite executive in order to have outsized influence within that organization. The most important thing to remember about power is that, I guess I'm going to borrow from Beyonce, it's not given to you, right? You take it or you make it in this circumstance. What you're really trying to do is to affect change, again, using the tools at your disposal. As you climb the ladder, as you gain rank, as you come into more traditionally observed seats of what people consider to be power, you absolutely can be ineffectual in that role. It's just a distribution mechanism, right? Titles, we all know, titles do not necessarily mean that you're a leader. Leadership really starts with you. It starts with you understanding your environment that you're operating in and understanding the objective, being able to communicate that objective clearly to the people around you and compelling them, leading them to your vision on how to execute it.
Bravo. I couldn't have said it any better myself. It really is understanding how to influence that as well and being clear and being deliberate. I think that's another thing. People will jump into things. And sometimes in the national security world, we have to take one step back, look at where everyone is at, and then take that objective. In everything you do, weave your vision. Now, there are going to be naysayers out there, though. And how have you dealt in your career kind of with the people that are like, it can't be done? We've always done it this way. That's immediately an indicator to me that I start to convulse a little bit because change is hard and there are going to be people that don't want to go in one direction. How have you dealt with that?
The first thing is to question why, right? Last summer, I had the opportunity to take a course with a professor at Wharton, actually on distressed asset investing, which sounds totally inappropriate, but distressed assets and startups are basically the same thing. It's just one of nuance, right? Where is the money? Have you already spent it or are you about to spend it? It's effectively the same thing. Anyway, this professor was talking about the role of the CEO within the organization. And in a distressed asset, the way that things usually go wrong is that the CEO, if you imagine a pyramid sitting at the top, does not understand the full breadth of things going on within his organization. If you look at the bottom of the pyramid, and he's so many levels removed from it in the top seat at the top of the pyramid that he really relies on all of that chain within his organization, chain of command in this circumstance, to communicate what's going on the bottom. And in effect, that CEO is almost always the MCP, the most clueless person. So the professor goes on to say that one of the red flags that distressed asset investors look for is when the CEO starts saying things like, because I said so. He uses some F-bombs in there. I'll just keep it with because I said so. The moment that you hear someone say, you know what? I say do it this way. It's a red flag because it means that he's surrounded himself with yes men that will, or yes women, that will not tell him the truth. And that lack of understanding and that lack of truth being told at the highest level of the organization almost always means that value is not being created, value is being destroyed, usually because you've incentivized them to some outcome to destroy the value. So going backward, whenever you hear someone say, because it's always been done this way, it is the same thing. You're not actually listening to what's happening on the ground and the operational details. Nothing is static, absolutely nothing, especially not when you're talking about the rapid pace of technological change right now. Whenever you hear someone say, this is the way it's always been done, or JFDI, just effing do it, it's a red flag. Something is going wrong and that organization is going to have a comeuppance.
Because you have to understand it in any dynamic environment, right? Ambiguity, you have to be very comfortable with it. I mean, wear it with pride because you're walking into an environment consistently changing. And of course, then we need to look at people who have done this well. And those are other leaders who have been comfortable with ambiguity and really reigned the day. And who are those leaders that you've admired and what have you learned from them?
I absolutely love a Horatio Alger story, which if you're not familiar, he's the guy that does the rags to riches stories. He was a prolific writer of them in the early 20th century. So modern day Horatio Alger stories are effectively underdogs, people that took very, very upside down circumstances and made it happen. There are very few underdog stories that I don't like. But I think when it comes to understanding how to apply these things to your own practice of leadership without citing a specific one, I actually don't think that the size of its impact matters as much as how they led with what they had available to them. You'll find that there are a number of exceptional leaders within your organizations, probably in like the lower enlisted ranks or even the lower officer ranks within our organizations. We have some exceptional talented leaders that are just like principal engineers or lower. They're not actually in our leadership team or our executive meetings, but they recognize problems. They understand how to prioritize, execute. They understand how to simplify, convey the intent, win people to the mission, and actually accomplish it. The net effect of a good leader is that they're able to organize a team, an effective team, and that teamwork compounds. So it really doesn't matter what your job or your organization is. What you're looking for is someone who is able to simplify, convey the intent, prioritize, execute on whatever that goal is, and they will achieve outsized impacts.
That's perfect. And it really is going down to delegation again. When you're on that team and you've stated it, and those leaders that are just very pointed, just do it, versus the one that says, I understand, you've got the expertise. We want to take that a step further, and you highlight that. On the flip side, you've also talked about some of the red flags you've seen in your business. And what are those red flags that national security should also be looking for as well?
Red flags are definitely when you have someone that's not fit for purpose. So if you've got the grinder in the position of the MacGyver, if you've got the person who's a subject matter expert in a position of leading people, that's almost always going to go badly, and vice versa. Red flags would definitely be a lack of information being shared or communicated, or the communication being ineffective. I actually just used this example at work this week, which is hilarious because I got to use in a military analogy. There's that whole adage, walk fast and carry a clipboard, right? And we all know that walk fast, carry clipboard sort of means like, as long as you look like you're moving with a purpose and you're busy, no one's going to ask any questions and you kind of like can do whatever you want to do.
Right.
I think that our calendars are much the same way. One of the red flags that I'm seeing right now is people conflating being busy with being productive. And if your calendar or your organization's calendars, if you were to take an inventory of how many hours of meetings they've got on them, especially right now, if it's all wall-to-wall meeting, when are they doing the work, right?
Oh, I couldn't have said it better. Amen. Amen to that. Thank you.
There's a fantastic Stanford study, I want to say it's like 5 or 6 years old, that found after 50 hours a week, productivity drops off a cliff. And after 55 hours a week, there is essentially no net benefit. Like you might as well not be working. So when you look at your calendar or your organization's calendars, and this again goes back to the red flag, if you've got 37 hours of meetings a week, your net time that you can actually do the output, the meaningful work, whether that's a presentation, a spreadsheet, or freaking going into the field and getting something done, it's just not there. You're going to end up with, at best, a subpar product, and at worst, burnout, and all the things that come down from burnout, lack of team cohesion, bad communication, loss of mission ownership, like all of the things that stem from that. So I would say right now, the red flags that I'm looking at across organizations, and I think it's affecting everybody because of our current work from home environments, is definitely, are we actually being productive or are we being busy?
Right. And with that, I really call it like a whirling dervish. You're just turning and turning and turning, but what is the output? What is the production? And as a leader, you can't take yourself too seriously, right? Something that was true yesterday, meetings that were done in the past, work, the way we combine things together, lists. I really ask people, and you said it already, ask why, question things. And you have to be willing, oh, by the way, to question yourself, your own beliefs, your institutional beliefs, what's going on. Because when you're wedded to that institutional gospel, that could really lead you down the wrong path from really seeing what's happening next.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can't be wedded to the old ways of doing things. Things are changing too fast underfoot in my organization, and thus I assume your organization as well.
Oh, absolutely. Now, we met during a Citadel gathering, and I found it incredibly insightful, talking about not being wedded to the past and really moving forward. It was very insightful, really, how a group of firsts, and so being one of the first women in the institution where you broke the glass ceiling, how that shaped the way you see things and think about things and how it's led to your current position right now.
Yeah, so I was one of the first 3 classes. I guess if Petra and Nancy graduated as a class of 2. So I graduated in the class of 2003. I arrived on campus in 1999. There was 1 senior at the time, and there was probably all of 30 or 40 women on campus out of 1,900 or so cadets. So it was a very small population of women at the Citadel at the time. I have learned a number of lessons that have sort of revealed themselves like an onion, peeling back layers over the years from that experience. But looking back on it, one of the things that I think we didn't put enough emphasis on was making sure that the playing field was more equitable, but not necessarily segregated. And I'll go into that in a little bit more specificity. So early on, we had this problem of being a super minority, and in their In the interest of helping us, administration would do things like have segregated female only, which is, by the way, almost a pejorative. Like, you don't want to say female only ever, but female only meetings. And what they didn't see was that our class cohesion, or unit cohesion in the case of the company system, was really based on us all being the same. By segregating us in the interest of helping us, they only highlighted more difference and division in a way that was actually net negative to our experience at the time. I think what should have been done is probably more of a, how do we communicate? How do we create unified cadet standards, and not necessarily exploited, or not exploited, but amplified the female-only standards for its moment. Another thing that I, in reflection, wish that I had done differently is that the women that rose through the ranks at that time recognized really early on that the way to do so was not to talk about being a woman at all. Like zero, like nothing. What you wanted to do was perform twice as well at everything and expect half the respect. I had the great fortune of, at the time, being a cross-country runner, and I could PT like a madman or madwoman. And that was like almost a crap screen, for a better way to put it, or lack of a better way to put it. Like, it got me so many passes that I recognized in hindsight was totally unfair to my less physically prepared female classmates, because they just didn't happen to be able to run like an 18:35K. Not their fault. It was just the way of the world at the time. I'm actually a bit ashamed of that. I wish that we had made more of a point to just say, guys, kind of get over it. This is happening. And talked about things as unified cadet standards, and less about, accepting this sort of normative environment of put up, shut up, do twice as much, and, expect half the respect, which was the standard at the time. Beyond that, though, how it's served me is definitely, I've gravitated, I would say at this point, to male-dominated environments. So one of the things, going back to the panel that you mentioned last week or 2 weeks ago, that you said was about the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, and specifically that women are over-mentored and under-sponsored. I think because of my experience at the Citadel, and because I continue to put myself in male-dominated environments, and actually the net benefit of understanding how to navigate male-dominated environments more capably than most of my female counterparts at any level of the organizations that I've worked at in the past, has gotten me more sponsorship, outside sponsorship, for a woman than most women have achieved. I've actually had very few mentors, but I've had 3 that I can think of, male sponsors, that opened doors for me. Now, I had to walk in them. I had to own the opportunity and make the most of it. But that sponsorship was absolutely critical. And looking backward, one of the things I want to make sure that I do is make sure that I am a force for good within whatever I can affect, and sponsor other women and underrepresented minorities to actually get in the door wherever I can. I think it's really, really important. Your point on sponsorship cannot be overstated.
Well, bravo. And I'm glad I'm quotable in that regard. And the fact that when speaking about that, I was really also challenging so many of the people in the room, and the people that hold power. Mentorship is absolutely critical. And that's one of my cornerstones of why I even started this podcast. Mentorship is an effort for all of us to have discussions. And this podcast is just one measure to really display these great conversations that I've had in so many different forums, and to have other people be able to kind of peer in and listen to this. But to get the job done, you can continue to build the bridge to mentorship. You help someone walk across that, but they've got to do it themselves. And that goes to kind of what Amanda has done in creating change in her world and her efforts that she's done in business. But she also recognizes, and that's what I kind of love to point at people, that you've got to, once you've made it and arrived, now it's your time to turn around. And it shouldn't be the first time, by the way. You should be mentoring along the way. But then you're grabbing hold of someone else and sponsoring them and helping to pull them up to your level. Even if it's just checking in on them, even if it's just opening a door, but even more so, sponsorship is a big step forward. When they're not in the room, you're the only voice that has the ability to say, hey, have you thought about XYZ? Sponsoring is taking the mentorship to the next level. Great point, Amanda. And I really appreciate all the work that you've done throughout your career to do this. So let's end this episode and kind of talk about what's next for you.
I'm currently head of North America for Curve. Curve is a UK-based fintech company. I realize that term might be lost on this particular audience. So financial technology company. We're a payments card, and we're basically all of your cards in one. Think of it as a digital wallet with a card as a form factor. So, if for some reason you can't use your phone, although we do work with Google Pay and Apple Pay, all of your cards can be linked with just one. We're expanding in the United States. We'll launch later this summer in beta and then fall for full commercial launch, and hiring a heck of a lot of people, particularly engineers.
Awesome. And I'll have this company in the show notes, so you'll be able to see that. Last but not least, what's the final advice you'd like to give this great audience listening?
There's so much that I would love to be able to say. For the women, particularly those that are transitioning out of a military career, one of the things that I find really interesting is there's an old stat that women don't apply to jobs unless they meet 80% of the criteria, and men apply typically when they have roughly 50%. I don't know whether or not that's true, but I can say in my anecdotal experience, I have yet to receive an application from an underqualified female candidate for a senior level position ever. And I've been working now for 17 or 18 years. So my parting advice would be for the women in the audience, make sure you're not selling yourself freaking short. like just go for it, because I can promise you your male counterparts are.
Awesome. Awesome advice. Take that first step. I think that's the biggest point we can talk about, is that you don't have to be meeting 100% of everything. Just step forward. And as you started this episode, just as we're concluding, it's really showing up. So thank you for showing up today to listen. And thank you so much, Amanda, for showing up to be my guest.
Oh, thank you so much again for having me. It was wonderful talking to you.
That was Amanda Orson. You can connect with her on Twitter at Amanda Orson. She is hiring 40 people in the United States this year, especially software engineers. Learn more at curve.com/careers or reach out to her directly. And if you're interested in being one of Curve's first U.S. customers, feel free to join the waitlist at curve.com/USA. I really appreciate you listening to this conversation. And if you want more candid perspectives on leadership, go to colonelcandid.com. I encourage you to sign up for the newsletter, where you'll receive the latest Candid Leadership episode notifications, writing, and links, and other great leadership and mentorship content. I would also encourage you to share this podcast with your friends, colleagues, and whoever you think could benefit from the information and wisdom shared by my amazing guests. I know I grow with every conversation, and I want to share that experience with as many leaders as we can. This show grows by word of mouth, so be sure to share this podcast, and please, if you think we've earned it, leave us a 5-star review on wherever you find yourself listening to this podcast. Thanks again for joining me. I'm Colonel Candace Frost.